Diagrams. Numbers and diagrams are highly abstract and condensed summaries of the world. They require a degree of mental effort to bridge the gap between them and the aspects of the real world they stand for. Approach them slowly and with care, allowing yourself time to get the feel of what you are looking at. Don't assume you already know what you are looking at. It's easy to be distracted by the surface appearance of a diagram, but we are really interested in the underlying message. Morality and climate change. Okay, so let's have a quick summary, because we've galloped through a bit of philosophy here. I've suggested that we're rationally required to do what morality requires of us, so it's a reason that tells us what we should and shouldn't do. If we don't do what rationally requires of us, this is because we're ignorant, or, if you don't agree with Aristotle or Socrates, we're possibly weak or corrupt, and we may be ignorant of what morality requires of us because we're relying on others. So what's all this got to do with climate change?
Also, malaria is something that is a very complex disease with this complex life cycle. That means that if you're going to eliminate it, you have to be able to target cute parasites and humans. You have to be able to target parasites in the mosquitoes, that mosquito population. And so that requires a lot of resources. It requires really good planning and a health system across all these different levels. And so I think the political capital that you need for that, the educational infrastructure you need for that, the economic resources you need for that are quite a challenge.
Icy objects such as comets may have helped start life on Earth by delivering water and carbon-based molecules to the young planet, because putting something on ice doesn't necessarily keep it from changing. A new study finds that even in frigid, deep space environments, simple hydrocarbon molecules can react to become more complex ones. The process even works when temperatures drop to near absolute zero. But just what kind of organic molecules would exist on the icy bodies of a forming solar system? Researchers at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California, investigated how organic molecules might evolve toward greater complexity, even in the cold of interstellar space. The scientists found that ultraviolet light, which radiates from stars and galaxies, can induce rapid changes in icy hydrocarbon molecules cooled to 5 Kelvin. That's a frosty minus 451 degrees Fahrenheit. The chemical reactions resulted in molecules of more complexity, which is the right direction to go if you want to eventually make amino acids and biological molecules. The study appears in the Astrophysical Journal Letters. It just goes to show, if you really want to freeze something in place, you'd better encase it in carbonite.
We sign our names to various documents all the time. Some signatures seal a legal contract. Others pledge us to an action. Now a study finds that when and where someone signs a document can influence the likelihood of them being honest or cheating. Scientists had people sign more than 1,300 auto insurance forms. One group signed at the top of the form, the other at the bottom. And those who signed at the top admitted to nearly 2,500 more miles of usage than those who signed at the bottom, which translated into about a $48 difference in annual premiums. According to the researchers, because the top signers put their names on the document before they were even tempted to fabricate information, they are less likely to act dishonestly. The study is in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Many people routinely deceive themselves to rationalize dishonest behavior. The $345 billion gap between what people should be paying in U.S. taxes and what they claim isn't just due to chronic liars. It also depends on normally honest people stretching the truth. Perhaps having taxpayers sign their forms before filling them out would cut down on that stretching.
You might not know how many calories were in that sandwich, but if you got lunch at the Massachusetts General Hospital cafeteria, you could tell with one glance whether you'd made a healthful choice. Offerings are color-coded. Simply posting calories does not always get consumers to make healthier choices, so researchers tried something different. Mass General's cafeteria food and beverage options were classified as least, somewhat, or most healthful with red, yellow, or green labels. Green is healthiest. Researchers then tracked some 4,600 employees. About 6 months after the changes were made, the purchases of red label foods decreased by more than 15%, and red beverages dropped by 39%. Green food and drink purchases increased, according to the study in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine. Making healthy food choices easier could especially help the poor and undereducated, the very populations most affected by the obesity epidemic. Mass General employees from these groups made the biggest improvements.
It's not easy being yellow. Bananas now face 2 separate fungal epidemics which threaten to pluck the fruit off of our tables. Fortunately, researchers have now sequenced banana DNA, producing the genome of a banana variety that may hold the secret to defeating the diseases. The report is in the journal Nature. Today, half of all bananas, including the ones you probably buy, belong to the Cavendish variety, whose popularity stems in part from having no seeds. But this trait also removes sexual reproduction from the equation. The bananas are thus all genetically identical and identically vulnerable to the 2 fungal epidemics, Panama disease and black leaf streak disease. Researchers sequenced the genome of a banana variety called D.H. pahang, whose genes contributed to the Cavendish. While the genome shows where this fruit fits in the history of plant evolution, it could also help researchers understand why D.H. pahang, unlike its descendant, is resistant to the funguses behind both Panama and black leaf streak disease. Knowing the genes responsible for this resistance could help breeders create stronger, more resistant bananas, which has a lot of appeal.
Interesting sound. I would have guessed a Wild West performer was practicing with a bullwhip while also vacuuming. But no, that sound is apparently produced by the Aurora Borealis, the Northern Lights. Since 2000, researchers at Finland's Aalto University have been collecting audio as part of what's called the Auroral Acoustics Project. Folk tales had long held that the lights also produce odd sounds, but the claims were hard to prove. And some researchers thought that any noises produced by the energetic particles that cause the light show would be far too high in the sky to be heard on the ground. But the latest results indicate that at least some sounds are produced very close to the ground. A setup of 3 ground-based microphones allowed researchers to estimate that the sounds occur perhaps just 70 meters up. The results were just presented at the International Congress on Sound and Vibration in Vilnius, Lithuania. More information about the sounds of the Northern Lights could lead to a more complete understanding of the phenomenon. So if you see an aurora, keep your ears open.
Just like corporations, stars too can engage in mergers and acquisitions. A new study has identified a pair of white dwarf stars heading toward a merger. White dwarfs are the hot, super-dense remnants of spent stars. In a binary system called J0651, Two white dwarfs circle each other very rapidly. The binary pairing completes an orbit in less than 13 minutes. And that already rapid orbital dance is speeding up as the two white dwarfs spiral in on each other. Each year, their orbital period shrinks by 0.3 milliseconds. That's actually a pretty dramatic change on astronomical timescales. In about 1 million years, the white dwarfs will get so close that the larger one will start to cannibalize its smaller companion. Before long, the two stars will likely become one. The study appears in the Astrophysical Journal Letters. The tightly wound white dwarf binary should also be radiating gravitational waves, ripples in the fabric of space and time. But today's gravitational wave detectors are not sensitive enough to detect them. And that's okay. Astronomers have another 1 million years before things get really interesting to build an instrument that's up to the task.
For Earth-like planets around other stars, but one way to limit the search can be to figure out where an Earth-like planet cannot exist and eliminate those types of systems. In a new study, astronomers turned their attention to so-called hot Jupiters. These are Jupiter-sized planets that have an orbit of only about 3 days. The scientists looked at 63 hot Jupiters to see if they could find evidence for any nearby Earth-like planets. They found none. But it could be that the companion planets are too small in size or mass, or just aren't detectable with the current techniques. So the researchers then turned to hot Neptunes and warm Jupiters. These are Jupiters with slightly longer orbits. They found only 2 potential nearby planets among 222 hot Neptunes. And of the 31 warm Jupiters, 5 showed evidence of a companion. The findings are in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. The current theory is that hot Jupiters formed and then migrated in towards their stars. Researchers say that the migration might have, quote, disrupted the formation of Earth-like planets. Good thing our Jupiter kept its cool.
As it ages, white paper turns a distinctive yellow. But why? To find out, scientists artificially aged modern paper to reveal the changes on the molecular level. The research is in the journal Physical Review Letters. For 48 days, 3 unbleached paper samples aged rapidly in reactors that simulated different environmental conditions. The researchers then compared the artificially aged samples to the real deal, 3 pieces of paper crafted in 15th century Europe. This technique allowed them to gauge the types and amounts of changes going on. About 90% of the weight of old paper is cellulose, the sturdy material that makes up plant cell walls. But over time, cellulose fibers oxidize. The process modifies parts of various molecules and turns them into what are called chromophores, which absorb light. White paper is white because it reflects all colors of light. Aging paper filled with chromophores reflects wavelengths that make it look yellow. The non-destructive technique used in this study could inform research to preserve and even whiten ancient texts and art, and give paper conservation a brighter outlook.
On Election Day, where do you vote? If it's in a church, you might be inclined to vote more conservatively than if you cast your ballot at a school or government building. That's according to research published in the International Journal for the Psychology of Religion. And the effect seems to hold, whether you're Christian, Muslim, or agnostic, progressive, independent, or conservative. The study found that when random people were surveyed in front of a church, they gave more socially and politically conservative responses than people surveyed while standing in front of a government building. The shift in people's attitudes, the researchers suggest, was likely a result of visual priming, meaning that people who could see the religious building were, consciously or not, getting cues that influenced their response. The surveys were conducted in Europe, so it's possible American voters might react differently. But the survey included subjects from more than 30 countries to try to minimize a particular national bias. So, before you cast your vote this election year, think about whether your view is influencing your views.
If you enjoy sharing all your likes and dislikes on Facebook, you're definitely not alone. Research finds that broadcasting personal opinions gives people the same sense of reward as earning money. The study is in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Study subjects had their brains scanned while they either talked about their opinions or judged the beliefs of another, and sharing their own point of view stimulated more activity in the reward processing parts of the subjects' brains. In another experiment, participants got to choose among reporting their own opinion, judging someone else's opinion, or answering a true or false question, and for each choice they could earn varying amounts of money. Rather than maximize their winnings by answering the questions that were worth the most cash, people preferred to talk about themselves, even though they sacrificed an average of 17% of their potential earnings to do it. For the participants, sharing personal information was its own reward, which means that people like comedian Patton Oswalt, who tweets photos of what he's having for lunch, probably feel like $1 million.
For all his fame and celebration, William Shakespeare remains a mysterious figure with regards to personal history. There are just two primary sources for information on the Bard: his works and various legal and church documents that have survived from Elizabethan times. Naturally, there are many gaps in this body of information, which tells us little about Shakespeare the man. Stephen Lowry. Lawrence Stephen Lowry. Lawrence Stephen Lowry, RBS, RA, was an English artist. Many of his drawings and paintings depict Pendlebury, Lancashire, where he lived and worked for more than 40 years, and also Salford and its surrounding areas. Lowry is famous for painting scenes of life in the industrial districts of northwest England in the mid-20th century. He developed a distinctive style of painting and is best known for his urban landscapes peopled with human figures often referred to as matchstick man. He painted mysterious, unpopulated landscapes, brooding portraits, and the unpublished marionette works, which were only found after his death. Animals. In animals, a movement is coordinated by a cluster of neurons in the spinal cord called the central patterns generator, CPG. Produces signals that drive muscles to contract rhythmically in a way that produces running or walking, depending on the pattern of pulses. A simple signal from the brain instructs the CPG to switch between different modes, such as going from a standstill to walking. CEO. That brings us to the CEO's second duty, building everyone, or more accurately, building the senior team. All the executives report to the CEO, so it's the CEO's job to hire, fire, and manage the executive team. From coaching CEOs, I actually think this is the most important skill of all, because when a CEO hires an excellent senior team, that team can keep the company running. When a CEO hires a poor senior team, the CEO is up spending all of their time trying to do with the team, and not nearly enough time trying to do with other elements of their job. The senior team can, and often does, develop the strategy for the company, but ultimately, it's always the CEO who has the final go, no-go decision on strategy. Bored in class. A majority of U.S. high school students say they get bored in class every day, and more than 1 out of 5 have considered dropping out, according to a survey released on Wednesday. The survey of 81,000 students in 26 states found 2/3 of high school students complain of boredom, usually because the subject matter was irrelevant or their teachers didn't seem to care about them. Barcode scanners. Many different types of barcode scanning machines exist, but they all work on the same fundamental principles. They all use the intensity of light reflected from a series of black and white stripes to tell a computer what code it is seeing. White stripes reflect light very well, while black stripes reflect hardly any light at all. The barcode scanner shines light sequentially across the barcode, simultaneously detecting and recording the pattern of reflected and non-reflected light. The scanner then translates this pattern into an electrical signal that the computer can understand. All scanners must include computer software to interpret the barcode once it's been entered. This simple principle has transformed the way we are able to manipulate data and the way in which many businesses handle record keeping. Integrated ticket. Well, in 2004, we integrated ticketing in Southeast Queensland. So we have introduced a paper ticket that allowed you to travel across all the 3 modes in Southeast Queensland. So bus, train, and ferry. And the second stage of integrated ticketing is the introduction of a smart card. And the smart card will enable people to store value, so to put value on the card, and then to use the card for traveling around the system. Neolatin. Those of you who've never heard the term Neolatin may be forgiven for thinking it's a new South American dance craze. If you're puzzled when I tell you it has something to do with the language of Romans, take heart. Over the years, many classes who have confessed they are not really sure what it is either. Some have assumed that they are so-called late Latin, written at the end of the Roman Empire. Others have supposed it must have something to do with the Middle Ages. Or perhaps it's that pseudo-Latin which my 5- and 7-year-old boys seem to have gleaned from the Harry Potter books, useful for spells and curses that they zip one another with makeshift paper ash ones. No, in fact, Neolatin is more or less the same as the Latin that was written in the ancient world, classical Latin. So, what's so new about it? Traffic jam. For the first time, Japanese researchers have conducted a real-life experiment that shows how some traffic jams appear for no apparent reason. They placed the 22 vehicles on a single track and asked the drivers to cruise around at a constant speed of 30 kilometers an hour. At first, traffic moved smoothly, but soon the distance between cars started to vary and vehicles clumped together at one point on the track. But the jam spread backward around the track like a shock wave at a rate of about 20. At first, traffic moves smoothly, but soon the distance between cars started to vary and vehicles clumped together at one point on the track. But the jam spread backward around the track like a shock wave at a rate of about 20 kilometers an hour. Real-life jams move backward at about the same speed.
Thought. Now that story's been scotched as only part of contingency planning, but it was a symptom of the dramatic turn of events in South Australia, and it flushed out other remarks from water academics and people like Tim Flannery, indicating that things were really much worse than had been foreshadowed even earlier this year. So is Adelaide, let alone some whole regions of South Australia, in serious bother, considering that the vast majority of its drinking water comes from the beleaguered Murray, something many of us outside the state may not have quite realised? Is their predicament something we have to face up to as a nation?
Patriotism. The effect of the first difference is, on the one hand, to refine and enlarge the public views by passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens, whose wisdom may best discern the true interest of their country, and whose patriotism and love of justice will be least likely to sacrifice it to temporary or partial considerations. The effect of the first difference is, on the one hand, to refine and enlarge the public views by passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens, whose wisdom may best discern the true interest of their country, and whose patriotism and love of justice will be least likely to sacrifice it to temporary or partial considerations.